Ethical evaluations can be split into two classes, the deontic and the archaic. The deontic attempts to answer the question, what should I do? While the archaic asks, what kind of person should I be in order to determine the qualities of a good actor? Verse 11. There are two fundamental classes of moral vocabulary, deontic and archaic. The first serving the prescriptive function. The second class contains terms used for moral evaluation of an actor. Such evaluations are primarily intended to direct actions capable of performing these functions. All terms include good, blameworthy, worthy, virtuous, etc. and prefer the archaic. It can capture many of the descriptive qualities of the deontic while providing a richer vocabulary. Our ethics should both be on good or bad and explore praiseworthy, charitable, admirable, and others. Verse 11. Degree terms indicate the presence of many criteria used in evaluation. Archaic vocabulary is infinitely richer and allows us to draw much finer distinctions in active evaluations than deontic. Praiseworthy can be conveyed by ought to be then, yet expressing the admirable in deontic vocabulary terms seems impossible. All that can be said in deontic terms can be expressed in archaic terms, and this commits us to the task of determining the qualities of a good actor. However, it is impossible to derive ethics from pure academic reflection. A point is that the development of all academic framework presupposes those prior values which are not yet derived, i.e. the value of truth and honesty, the good of scholarship, etc. B point is that you have to presuppose the proper way to make the derivation, which smuggles in a hidden, non-direct moral premise and would simply end up describing the way the world is, not the way it ought to be. The result is a virtue paradigm. Ethics is a developmental social phenomenon that is established by an inculcation reader. Virtue ethics exposes the dependence on moral activity on roading for already virtuous agents. Moral rationality is found in moral education. Ethics was going to apprentice moral agent. The agents learn from the experience. This is not presuppose they require the ability to provide justifications. Virtue is learned by counting on various ways of doing things and going on to do the same in the new ways. Virtue is basic and there can be nothing beyond the expertise which makes when you're justified. And by extension, states have duty to promote civic virtue. Smith 12. In order to promote the virtue of good life, the state could inculcate a civic virtue. You can be a good citizen while lacking the moral qualities of a good person. Coercive laws are necessary to avoid external behavior that cannot create virtuous people, because virtue is choice but cannot be present without voluntariness. Human laws do not make men good, but rather establish the outward conditions in which a whole good life can be lived. Thus, the standard is promoting civic virtue. Prefers that one calls for articulation, justification of good or exclusionary, and miss the point. It's impossible. It is still possible to promote good things without the exact articulation of what they are able and dug. Having ethical reasons without being able to say what they are appears very common. Becoming articulate a reason may be impossible. The wheel of philosophical argument like the culture we excuse ourselves from charitable engagement with those who lack training. We should encourage inarticulacy. Our relationship with others might not be predicated on the premise that they need to support their commitments in argument for this commitment deserve to be taken seriously. Cut the second argument. Contention. Interest group endorsement questionnaires are frequent and secret showman. And all 16. Campaign promises are being made publicly, giving voters opportunity to weigh many promises to candidates at all levels of government, making secret promises to interest groups that the public has no way of evaluating. Promises are happening behind the scenes process of interest groups questionnaires. Interest groups require candidates seeking endorsements to answer surveys. Too often, candidates' responses are kept confidential. There's 3 internal links here. First is dishonesty, showman. And all 16. It's an invitation to dishonesty when a campaign really needs an endorsement. Secret responses provide temptation to answer one way for a group and another for a different group. Second is split obligations, showman. And all 16. Candidates are creating secret obligations on matters which voters have a right to know. Why should a Chamber of Commerce know how a candidate promises to vote when voters do not? Third is predispositions, showman. And all 16. These questionnaires create candidates have already made important decisions on public policy matters before they hear votes out through public hearing and deliberation. Candidates are pre-committed to certain positions. They aren't really going to the process of governing with an open mind. And conflict of interest is an ongoing and structural impact. Hernandez 18. Conflicted interest analyzed the disclosure research. The reports from 6,933 lawmakers across the 47 states. The profound numerous examples of lawmakers who introduced legislation that directly and indirectly help their businesses. Lack of effective disclosure rules for officials in all facets of state government opens up the doors to potential conflicts of interest and public corruption. Legislators do business with the state government. Disclosure holds them accountable. That links to the framework. A point is that private actions influence public actions. The virtue of public officials is relevant. They learn shown in 15. Can a politician be ethical in public if they are unethical in private? Could a person who cannot control their appetites be just as possible? For a passion to overrule reason, leaders should have true virtue, pulling in the same direction. A politician who cheats is not someone who can be trusted. B is that the public should know the private actions of public officials, because the public sphere should serve as a model for the people, enabler, and show 15. The central task of the public sphere is education, helping shape the soul state to do the right thing. A public servant must serve as an example of good conduct. C is that public office necessitates transparency, enabler, and show 6. Everyone's entitled to privacy. When a person goes into public life, you must understand that certain issues must be private, can become public interest. Becoming a public servant means putting the public's interest ahead of your own. Thus, the plan. The 50 states and all relevant sub-actors of the United States ought to require candidates for public office to disclose their responses to interest group questionnaires. To clarify, disclosure will occur within 15 business days of submitting the questionnaires and can occur on a state website or a politician's personal website, shown in all 16. Why not only call the questioner public? If endorsing group doesn't want their question, candidate's response to the question, the endorser's motive to their creating an obligation they know voters won't like that can be used against the candidate later. Before candidates answer secret interest group questionnaires, they can ask themselves if promises would effectively tie their hands. In disclosure solves, it creates public influence, returns Wang and Hamilton 17. Disclosure is a source of information permits society to become aware of interest supporting candidates. When candidates are relying on other conflicts of interest, disclosure discourages corruption. Journalists can identify supporters, may discourage candidates from corrupt activity. Scandal involves public humiliation. Underview. First is that methodological pluralism is a necessary aspect of critique. Like 14. Upholding one's subjective position on critical scrutiny have far-reaching consequences. Methodological pluralism is at the heart of sustainable critique. Multiple methods to understand the same meta phenomena. Scholar also goes back and forth different methods. No single method can the upper hand means combining methods are deep incompatible. Second is that you should reevaluate the debate under T interpretations. A point of substantive education means they can read frivolous arguments whenever destroys time and substance. Incentivizes the one-year go for the RBS since it's game over. B point is times through the one-year account when theory is substance since it's time crunching. The tuner dumps on what I undercover. C point is reciprocity. Only neck can read T, making it game over. Let them abuse that power. D point is not severance. I still defend the whole affirmative. It's also reciprocal because they get more ground. Neither so will win on T. Third is use reasonability. If I win defense and abuse is marginal enough not to vote on substance, don't vote on norming because theory requires abandoning substance instead of normies. The norm must outweigh voting on theory instead of substance. Also disincentivize quality engagement because it matters become persuasive arguments. Debates only impact. Mark the third argument at debates only impact.
Can you resend it?
I just stopped the debates only impact.
Will you also skip something in the framework?
Oh yeah, the rule form. Yeah, sure. Send.
Okay, I'll start across. Okay. How do we promote virtue ethics?
Okay, so that requires an explanation of the framework. The goal of virtue ethics is to create virtuous people. So for example, even if something else
Right,
is
I understand
true,
the goal. My question is, how do we do that?
What do you mean?
How do we achieve the criterion? What steps
Oh
can we
yeah,
take
so
to
the way that we are you asking how we determine what is virtuous, or
No.
are you asking how we meet it?
how we meet?
Yeah, so the offense or the plan says that interest group questionnaires are currently frequent and secret. The problem with these interest group questionnaires is that they can be used for things like dishonesty, to lie to some people and cheat about others, or make contradicting promises, or also do things like have less than open
Okay,
minds
what
and
is
have
an interest
predetermined
group
steps.
questionnaire?
When an interest group, for example, the NRA sends a questionnaire to a candidate to see if they want to endorse the candidate based on if the candidate's interests or policies line up with the interest group's
Okay,
agenda.
do you look to the consequences of actions?
What do you mean?
Do consequences matter under virtue ethics?
Like, we defend things happening, like the consequences of the
No,
plan
my
are
question
permanent.
is, do they matter?
What do you mean by do they matter?
Like, do you evaluate consequences, or is it a deontological focus?
Obviously, the framework makes some kind of RTA focus that says we should focus on promoting virtue. Like, other consequences aren't relevant to this framework, but you can read a framework that says other consequences are relevant, because I'll defend the plan has
What do
various
you mean by
consequences.
other consequences?
For
What does that
example,
mean?
if you read like a disad that has an extinction impact, that doesn't matter under a virtue ethicist framework.
Okay, so the argument is that specific consequences matter.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Let's talk about the underview. Why is methodological pluralism necessary?
Yeah, so methodological pluralism says that based on various scenarios, different issues can be understood by different people from varying perspectives. It says that we should combine these perspectives in order to better understand an issue because we can see it from multiple different angles. This allows us to
Okay.
combine multiple different perspectives and understand like the way that a certain issue can be perceived by multiple different people and thus
Okay,
determine the
that's
best
fine. Do
strategy
you
to
find
address it.
implementation?
I feel the plan, yes.
Okay, let's talk about the second argument. You say evaluate debate under T interps. Is this specific to T or also theory?
Well, if a theory argument can be re-evaluated per se, then yes. For example, like spec, I will specify like a definition, for example, in cross-ex or in the 1AR,
Okay, that's
and that's
fine.
all.
And did you also use reasonability and use epistemic?
I read A and B on reasonability.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about a virtue paradigm. What does it mean that, what do you mean when you say ethics is a developmental social phenomenon?
Yeah, so the reader evidence is that the only way to be prescriptive, as in understand like what we ought to do as people, what kind of people we should be, rather than simply focusing on what good or bad things we should do. Do you want me to finish?
That's fine. I'll start running prep now. Okay, I have 54. So the order's gonna be 3 off case. And I'll send it over now.
Was it 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you say you already sent it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm hoping. Okay. Oh wait, we're on case when you get there.
Under you first.
Okay.
Is everyone ready?
It's a 3 off case, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Okay. A lengthy frame honesty and virtue as a single universal
No.
denying cultural differences. Climb 1. Each tradition will have its own catalog of virtues, and these often conflict with one another. Homer, Sophocles, Aristotle have all different and incompatible theories. There are no universal virtues. Each culture's set will be unique and fully understandable only from that particular tradition. B. Impacts their ethical project fail since they mandate a one-size-fits-all ethical theory for all states. They uniquely link by telling people what it means to be virtuous instead of just creating material conditions by which people can develop virtue. And don't let them de-link by saying that they just defend the United States. They're all people of all different cultures within the United States. Climb 2. The project of trying to develop a universal morality was doomed to fail because it's not recognized that all morality must be relative to a particular community. No, and they can be freed from context. We must become alienated from ourselves. We lose the ability to locate the history we are a part. Then their ethical theory approach means they can't solve material injustice. Climb 3. If slaveholding, racial inequality, and unequal material distribution are to be criticized, this will be have done a utilitarian viewpoint. It is true that specific virtues have the same meaning of cultures. Courage is a perennial virtue, but understanding of what courage would dramatically differ depending on the particular tradition in where there might not be one overriding narrative that binds a community together. Where should we not say that the individual can only determine for themselves what is virtuous? C. Alternative, drop the debate or reject their scholarship to reject the method's cultural oppression. Hold the debaters accountable for what they do. It's Vincent. Performances in round reflects beliefs. What we hold is no longer enough to vote off the flow. Debaters must be held accountable for the words they say in round and for the implications. Educators in the debate space have an ethical obligation to the education as long as our performances are merely by bodies and foster a climate of violence to students of color dramatically destroy the transformative potential this community could have. And that's also serving as a role of the ballot as far as the role of the ballot is to question the performance of the 1ACN as well as the NC as far as it's a question of how we perform in round because that shapes the policy. Next off, surveillance dissent. A lengthy act creates a surveillance state since it's impossible to know whether people have the valuable information until after we infringe on privacy. The act has to adopt a violate first, ask questions later mindset. Further, the U.S. will arbitrarily pick and choose the candidates to surveil. Casper. One's location in the hierarchy of organization gamers one more or less privacy than others. The higher points political club, the greater ability to protect one's privacy in today's massive database information system. Those who do info gathering wield the most power. The inability to keep the information private represents a lack of power. Conversely, more powerful people have greater capacity to keep secrets. Affording less privacy to others while ensuring one's own not only reduces the power but increases one's own impact. B. Impact. They reaffect racism. Racism surveillance is uniquely anti-black, targeted at people of color to undermine resistance movements. Round it up. Black Lives Matter revived attention around surveillance of black organizers by police and state institutions. Intensification of surveillance calls up comparisons to programs such as COINTELPRO established to surveil leading movement organizers. Surveillance practices are predicated on the colonial logics of anti-blackness. Blackness functions as a key site through which surveillance is practiced. When surveillance practice gets to it, enacted on the racialized bodies, that's another part of racialization repeated in many ways. And surveillance uniquely harms women. Gabriel. Surveillance is a means of maintaining social structures of gender technologies. Surveillance are crucial to the maintenance of the existing power structures, including patriarchy. She adds, in watching private lives, you view the world unloading your vulnerability. The knowledge created through surveillance surveillance always involves manipulation. Next off theory. A interpretation, the affirmative debater may not spec a democracy in the information disclosed. If they didn't disclose the 1AC text before the round B violation, they spec both of those and didn't tell me what the text of the 1AC was. Now, the first standard is clash as far as that I literally have no prep to respond to this AC is so because it's so hyper-specific. Also, this supercharges it once it wasn't disclosed as far as that I couldn't even write a speech off, which means I have to use all of my prep before the NC to even have a functional NC case. The second, that's the internal link to fairness as far as that requires reciprocal burdens to access the ballot, and it's an internal link to education as far as that we don't even have a clear debate if I don't have time to prep before the round or before the NC. And the second is limited. There are 97 democracies in the world, and there's an infinite amount of things that the public has a right to know, which means that there's an infinite number of acts, and that's impossible for me to prep out every one, but disclosure solved. But since he didn't disclose it, it's literally impossible for me to prep the app. Also, generics don't solve because the only generics I could have are to all states, and I can't have generics for every single one of the 97 democracies in the world. And the voter is fairness meaning ensuring that both debaters have equal opportunities to win the round. Education doesn't matter if both debaters can't access a draw. The debater of the round has already been skewed. You should not endorse a performance that denies fairness. Dropping the R means kicking the out. That kills fairness since they can chip their IBC and I can't lock them down. And no RBIs all one. RBIs create a chilling effect that encourages debaters to read on topical apps and when on RBI. The point of theory is to check abuse. RBIs destroy the purpose of theory. If they can't do that, this turn T is placing arguments since I don't police what they should be talking about. Second, RBIs make no sense in a T debate. It's the expectation going around that your topical just as expensive that the app is 6 minutes long. And use competing interpretations. Reasonability makes no sense in a T debate. You can't be reasonably topical. You either are using competing interpretations for them to defend what they are or why they are T, and if they can't, they should lose. Now, onto the app. The underview. Off of methodological pluralism, first it's hard just said that we should consider different methods. It doesn't mean that we we should commit to multiple methods. The argument is that scholars discuss back and forth, but that means that we should think about the other perspectives. I thought about the other perspectives, and then I decided that virtue ethics was a good idea. Well, wasn't a good idea. The second argument is that we reevaluate debate on T in terms. The first is substantive education, but you destroy substantive education. Sorry, you destroy substantive education as far as that I do not have any prep to apply to your AC. The second is times skew. The 1 hour can't win theory, but you should have thought about times skew before you made an app that was inaccessible. And he also says use reasonability. The first is norming, or theory requires abandoning substance to set a norm, but we only have to abandon substance because you weren't topical in the first place. The second is extreme offense, defense, and risk of offense, but this is the same as far as that you can win on a risk of offense in the AC, so it should be the same on theory. Now, off the top of framework. The first rule of virtue ethics is that you cannot teach someone to be virtuous, which means that you cannot pass policies that are promoting virtues as far as that it is impossible to force someone else to be virtuous. Virtue ethics are learned, they are not taught, which means that you cannot take a single action that is going to make someone virtuous. That's the thesis of what virtue ethics is, also the criterion of promoting civic virtue. So first, that's impossible. The second argument is that it is immeasurable as far as that we don't know what's going to promote virtue ethics as far as that is going to not be universalizable also. Virtue ethics is useless in applied ethics, allowed in 89, gender modified. For virtue ethics, the question is what sort of person also be virtue will be weak in applied ethics. Virtue is not rule skills of moral perception are not routinizable, so cannot be transferred from agent to agent as a decision procedure. There is very limited advice on moral quantities. It's not easy to fathom what the exemplar would do, and sometimes you act out of character. Virtue theory is not a problem-oriented. It speaks to principles of action only in derivative manner. It ought too vague for a person who has not yet acquired moral insight. That means that since we're talking in the context of implementation, we ought to look at the advent of the contention. It only specifically talks about interest group endorsements, but first all politicians will circumvent that as far as that they need to get money from anonymous donors, and since there is a straight up rule of law that donors have the right to be anonymous, that means that they can continue like the things like the NRA can still continue donating to these people without like getting checked.
Okay. You think for cross-sex?
Yeah.
Let's talk about this virtue K. This seems to criticize Augustinian virtue ethics. How does that apply to the app, which is Aristotelian virtue ethics?
No, it talks about virtue ethics.
It literally says frame Augustinian virtue at the top of the K. How does it apply to this affirmative?
It says the one word. That doesn't mean that it doesn't apply to virtue ethics.
Your criticism talks about a single universal good, etc. Aristotelian virtue ethics says that the way in which we determine things are based on social practices, things like charitability, transcend social differences. How does your criticism apply when this is based on social practices that vary from culture to culture?
Yeah, so the Klein 2 evidence indicates that a one-size-fits-all ethical theory is bad for all states.
Okay, I'm asking you how the app is a one-size ethical theory when Aristotelian virtue ethics is different in that it says rather than having an objective good that all people value, we have varying core values that transcend different social cultures.
If the argument is that like virtue ethics is subjective per every culture, then that just puts you in a double bind in which virtue ethics has no definition or meaning.
Why does it not have a definition of meaning?
If
when
your
we know
argument is that
honesty are good and valued across different cultures?
Wait, can you repeat that question?
How does it have no meaning if we know that things like honesty and not cheating are valued across different cultures? I.e. in school, teachers don't want people to cheat.
So then you link into the K as far as that you just have a one-size-fits-all
argument. Okay, are you telling
argument.
me that not all cultures value honesty? Can you give me an example of like a group of people or a culture that thinks things like lying and cheating
That's
are
not
good?
the argument. The argument is that making blanket statements is necessarily bad in the context of virtue ethics.
How is it a blanket statement if it looks at social practices that vary across different cultures and says that all of them conclude the same way?
Yeah, so a blanket statement is something that generalizes all cultures, i.e. you just said all cultures believe X, Y, Z. That's problematic.
What if it is true that all cultures think that lying is bad?
Yeah, so we can look to the impacts, which specifically talks about, even if in this one instance, cultures think that like one thing is bad, we say that it's bad to universalize certain theories, which means that like taking...
What if it is actually universal and it's not being universalized?
Okay, I'm gonna continue talking. So we say that we say that the thesis of the app is saying like, all cultures think that like honesty is good, which means that all cultures think the same. So it's that logical syllogism,
That's
which
fine.
is
Let's talk about
necessarily
the
bad.
surveillance dissent.
Yeah.
You say that it selectively chooses. The plan says that all candidates must disclose within 15 business days on either their website or a state website. How is this selective? It seems
Yeah,
like
I know what
every
the
single
plan
candidate.
says. That still means that the state is the one enforcing it, and the state is policing itself, which is necessarily bad.
Why?
It also talks about how the state will specifically target people of color in the context that, like, they do that for every other
Do
instance in
candidates
state
follow
policies.
laws?
Do candidates follow laws? Sometimes.
Okay.
Donald Trump doesn't follow a lot of laws, but I
4
mean.
minutes. Start from. Stop prep 118 left. It'll be the AF, then the offs in order. And there's one card, and I'll send you the analytics on the US battle.
What?
I'll send you the analytics in the US battle.
On the ACE, are you starting with the underview or?
No, it'll be the framework, then the office.
So not just drop the underview or?
I'm not going for arguments.
Okay, that's fine. I just needed to know like where I should put it in my stack.
Okay. The card and counter term analytics extension. Is everybody ready?
Yep.
Here's an explanation of a virtue ethics framework. The goal of ethics is to create virtuous people. Even if something else is good or true, that doesn't necessarily make someone an ethical person. The archetype precludes the deontic. That means that we should look at things like what kind of person should someone be rather than what they ought to do. This captures descriptive qualities of things like character traits and looks beyond good and bad. It looks at the way things like different people function, like praiseworthy, charitable, or admirable, which allows us to create various conceptions of how people are as person. Here's an example. Virtue creates intrinsically good people. For example, I would rather play cards against someone who doesn't understand morality but believes we shouldn't cheat as a result of honor than a moral philosopher who knows ethics but thinks that cheating is good. That means that virtue ethics is something that is a social developmental phenomenon. What that means is that we act based on the way different things function. They say that you can't teach or force someone to be virtuous. No, the argument is that you don't need to force someone to be virtuous, rather that the plan allows the public to know about candidates' various virtues as a result of their interest group surveys and whether they were dishonest in answering various surveys, which means that the public needs to know whether candidates are virtuous when casting their votes. They say virtue is not applicable because there's no decision procedure. No, the offense under the affirmative contextualizes how virtue ethic works and proves that we can obviously weigh various contexts of virtues and that things like cheating are obviously bad under multiple cultures. Now, the offense. Interest group endorsement questionnaires are frequent and secret. The internal I'm voting for is a dishonesty argument. Various candidates will lie to one group and say something different to another group, which allows them to gain endorsements from multiple different groups, but also proves that they are internally dishonest. That links to the framework because private actions influence public actions. The virtue of public officials is relevant to the various people in the public sphere. The public sphere should serve as a model for people to determine whether people are good people as a kind of people. The plan solves to create public information and deterrence. They say politicians circumvent it because the groups like the NRA can donate without it being checked. Obviously, our affirmative is not about campaign finance. It's about disclosing interest group surveys so various public people can see the way that candidates are addressing these decay. Big problem with decay. They frame it based on Augustinian virtue, which says that there's some objective good that all people value. The affirmative is Aristotelian virtue ethics, which says that virtues are socially constructed and answers that different people believe in different things. We have various core values across different cultures, things like honesty and charitability, which prove that there are various social differences that construct virtue ethics, which means it is not one kind of objective good, which proves no link to their argument. Even then, excessive focus on reps kills social change. J15. Claims of victim depending alien merit the victim. The movement spirits can remove people, outrage people, illicit, the hopeful, lead, required mass politics, liberalism seem to cause positive. There's so many ways to step on my mind. Everyone's scared to speak politics, getting people to agree with someone, not making them afraid. Liberalism rests in confidence on the power of reason. Now the surveillance argument. First is that the information is not completely private. There's surveys of information that go to interest groups, which means it's obviously not information that's completely private, but the public should know. 2 point is that no, there's no arbitrary picking. The plan says it should be done for all surveys, and disclosure needs to occur within 15 business days. Third is that there's a link turn here. It checks the state and exposes when candidates are corrupt or cheating, which means that we can stop voting for those people. 4 is that candidates are subject to rule of law. They follow things like laws, or they go to jail and people don't vote for them. Their theory argument. Counter-intervention, invaders can break new affirmatives without disclosing part of the round. Net benefits 1 point solves their office taking private after it's only 1 round. They obviously read a critique and a diss, which proves there's loads of ways for them to engage. 2 points, argument, innovation. People won't break new if they have to tell the negative the position before the debate. That's the whole point of breaking new. 3rd is key to real world. Nobody tells other people what they're reading in advance or going to say an argument or debate. That's obviously not the way debate works. 4th is strategic thinking. It forces you to think on your feet, which was critical thinking and information processing, rather than regurgitating coach assigned strategies. Their generics will still apply. Things like the critique and diss, which solves clash. Now on their arguments, on their clash argument, first is no link to any of these arguments. I am topical and defend the topic. They're just not whining. They're just whining because I didn't tell them what the affirmative was, but obviously all of their limits and clash arguments are empirically denied by the fact that they answered the affirmative and read a critique and a diss. That under their interpretation is obviously not going to cut a whole bunch of prep that engage if I tell them 10 minutes before the round, which means that any kind of engagement which is proven in this round means you should vote out on this intro. You want it marked up?
Can you just, actually, you can just come over and tell me what you read.
1, 2, 4, 5.
Can you actually send it? Because I'm gonna think you read 3. Okay, and then I'll start prep when I get it.
Okay, I just replied all with the updated theory analytics. There were also theory arguments that aren't on the doc.
Okay.
Like, I just fixed them, so.
I'll start prep once I Okay, sorry. What arguments did you make that were analytics?
Theory?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's arguments that said you obviously have generics. You read a critique of our framing as well as a dissent to the resolution, which proves that you can engage with different affirmatives. You say you can't write a speech doc. Yeah, that's how prep time before the NC works. You have to, before the NC works, you have to figure out answers to the affirmative. That's the point of debate. Also, all your arguments about engagement, you literally said education doesn't matter in your voter section, which means that even if you buy your theory argument, there's no voter for it. Also, the AF is probably predictable because we're in the United States. It means that most AFs will probably be about the US. The rest of the arguments are on the doc. Oh, also your competing interior stuff was about there's no such thing as reasonably topical, but the app is topical. You're just complaining about me not telling you.
Okay, that's fine. So the order is going to be a little funky. It's going to be decay, theory, surveillance.
Wait, oh yeah, the virtue K.
Yeah. Then the underview, AC, framing of the round. And I'll signpost where I'm going because I know that's a lot.
So K, surveillance.
No. Yes, sorry. Wait, no. it's decay, theory, surveillance, underview, AC, framing.
K, theory, surveillance, AC, underview. Right.
Underview, AC, framing.
Okay.
Is everyone ready? I'll concede that I'll concede that the K of virtue ethics is a different kind of virtue ethics. This supercharges theory as far as that it's a question of me not having literally any prep. I didn't have enough prep because based on your hyper-specific interpretation of virtue ethics in combination with the AC. He doesn't have any offense on it now in theory. He misunderstood the interpretation. The encounter interpretation is debaters can break new affirmatives without disclosing them prior to the round. You can do that. My issue is that not only did you not disclose the new app, but you also made it super hyper-specific, which was the problem with the AC. Now, extend the interpretation that affirmative debaters may not specify democracy and information disclosed if they don't disclose the plan text of the AC prior to the round. There are a couple arguments. Not only did he not disclose, but also, which means that I couldn't engage, but also the plan is hyper-specific, which means that I couldn't even use generics, Now, let's go through the net benefits. The first is that it solves my offense because I can prep after. No, I want to get a bid at this tournament. I don't want to drop in elims. The second is argument innovation. So this is basically a hard debate, this new debate. Then I'll just read the same positions. You can break new. My issue is just that you are hyper-specific, so even my generics don't apply, which means I literally have zero prep. Even my generic on virtue ethics did not apply, which supercharges the argument. The third is that it's key to real world because nobody tells other people what they're reading in advance, but that would necessitate that everyone in the debate is doing the same thing and that they're all not disclosing, and that's not true because everyone discloses except for you. Also, even if disclosure is good, even if disclosure is bad, that doesn't necessitate that you could read a hyper-specific AC. And the fourth is strategic thinking because it forces next to think on their teeth, but there is a difference between strategic thinking and straight up inaccessible ACs. That I can think strategically if you don't disclose the app, but I can't think strategically if the app is so hyper-specific that I literally have no prep to read off it, and I have to extend the 7-minute NC, or I have to read prep that doesn't apply, aka the K. So I'm going to extend the standard. The first is clash. I didn't have a lot of prep on this the AC, which makes the round irreciprocal as far as that you have a 6-minute pre-written AC, and I have a 7-minute NC that I have to come up with and 2 minutes of prep before the NC, and that's supercharged with the fact that I also have to write analytics to the AC before my prep. He says that there's no link because he was topical. It doesn't matter if you're topical. It's a question of you literally defending one instance of the app in which there are thousands, there's an infinite amount of instances in which the app happens. So even if you're defending one instance of the app, that doesn't solve. He also says that the app that I answered the app, but you also said that that you didn't link to any of my arguments. So I'll concede that you don't link. That means that I couldn't have prep that applied. He said that I have to answer the app in prep, but it's a question of me writing a 7-minute speech in 4 minutes of prep, which is actually impossible. He also says that we should vote AF on the intern, but that makes no sense because he didn't go for an RBI, and he said... And he said that my argument against reciprocity doesn't make sense. Reasonability doesn't make sense because you can't be reasonably topical, but because it's not a question of topicality, but it's not a question of but it's not a question of topicality. Rather, it's a question of reasonability being incoherent. As far as that, there's no argument for being reasonably abusive or reasonably not abusive. You were either abusive or not. Now, extend this second argument, which was limits. There are literally an infinite number of acts. There are 97 democracies within the world, and in those democracies, there is each infinite amount of things that people could disclose, which means that there's an infinite amount of acts, and I cannot prep all those, and generics don't solve, because since he spec the actor, if I read a generic, he would just say that it's not specific to the United States, and if I read a generic about information, he would say that it's not specific to the type of information he applies, which means that this app is completely inaccessible. This is an argument under fairness, so him saying that me saying education doesn't matter as far as that I only link to fairness in the first place. Extend fairness as a voter that means we ensure that both debaters have equal opportunities to win the round, and drop the debater that the round has already been skewed. If I don't have any prep to read in the NC, then it's pointless for us to try and have a substantive debate. As far as that, he's made no link arguments on both of my ops. I agree, you don't link, so let's just go to theory. As far as that, I had no prep to read and extend no RBIs, and it creates a chilling effect that encourages people to read non-T apps, and no one's going to read theory as far as that they think they're going to lose. Overview on theory. I don't like going for theory. I read your paradigms. You guys don't like voting on theory. I get that. I was forced to go for theory. I was forced to go for theory because I literally had no prep. The K he made, I literally had no prep. This is the route that I have to take in order to make debate more accessible for people. Now onto the dissent. He says that it's not arbitrary. This is functionally a no-link argument. I'll concede that as far as that. You do not link to either of my prep. That means I have no prep in my Dropbox. So that's a reason why we negate on T now on the AC underview. Extend the conceded arguments on the underview. The first is that he should have thought. About his time skew before he decided to make the AC inaccessible. That means that we don't go for reasonability. Now in the AC proper, extend the argument that virtue ethics cannot be taught or encouraged. Cannot be encouraged by a policy, which means that the only way for us to teach virtue ethics is doing nothing, which means that we negate on presumption. Overview of the round. You vote on theory. It was inaccessible. He made no link arguments to both the K and to the dissad. I will concede both of those. I do not have any prep in my Dropbox that is going to answer this hyper-specific app, and I could have cut prep because we had 20 minutes before the round, but he wouldn't let me because he wouldn't disclose the plan text. None of his arguments on theory matter because they say why disclosure is bad, but it's okay if he doesn't disclose. Just don't make the app so hyper-specific that it is impossible to engage.
Okay, I have 118 left. Start prep. Okay, that's fine. It'll be the app, then the shell. Cool. Is everybody ready?
They go for the virtue ethics argument that you can't teach someone to be virtuous. They've conceded that you don't need to force someone to be virtuous. That plan allows the public to know whether candidates are virtuous when casting their votes, which is something that we say the public uniquely has a right to know, which affirms the resolution. There's a reason why I've won the substantive debate. The offense has been completely conceded throughout the debate, which means I've already won the case debate, which means all I have to do is win a risk of defense to this absurd theory argument, and you can vote the affirmative on case. The theory argument. The framing issue is that there are loads of generics that they could have read, and this affirmative is topical. All of their arguments are premised on me breaking a non-topical affirmative. Now, the line by line on the counter interpretation, they say that's super specific, but no, they say the counter interpretation doesn't apply, but no, the counter interpretation says I can break any new affirmative without disclosing it prior to the round, which means it's still competitive with their interpretation. They say that they want to bid, don't want to drop. No, obviously everybody wants to win rounds. It means that we should be allowed strategic variability, and this argument is not unique. It applies to both of us and doesn't prove any kind of abuse story. The real world argument, they say that all debaters disclose, but no, nobody discloses new affirmatives. That's how a new affirmative works in the debate space. They've also conceded real world, as in the actual real world outside of debate. People make arguments that throw people off. For example, in the 2016 presidential debate, Trump and Hillary would say things that throw their opponent off, and obviously they had to keep their composure and react and make arguments, which means that if anything, debate should be preparing you for the real world, and you should probably be trying to be responsive to the affirmative by making analytic arguments or logical arguments. Now, you say on strategic thinking that you can't think if there's no preparation. This concedes that it boosts critical thinking because you have to think on your feet and make logical responses rather than having coach-deciding strategies. You have to have information processing and actually realize how you interact with the affirmative. They've also conceded that they had framework answers and made substantive arguments on the case. Their surveillance decided, obviously they could have gone for a weak argument, saying that in certain cases the state would be selected. They just decided to concede an argument. It's not my fault. They didn't want to make arguments. They also have NCs up on their wiki about morally relevant distinctions between candidates and public people, which means that they could have read that NC in this round, and that NC was obviously in their Dropbox, which means you shouldn't buy any of this argument. They also could have read generic case, i.e. a state bad case, which applies to literally any affirmative that defends the state, like my affirmative, which means that there were loads of generics they could have read. Now the line by line on their arguments, yeah, they say they have to write analytics before the NC, or before reading the NC. Yeah, that's how preparation time works. You answer the affirmative. Obviously, you could have prepped the United States. We're in the United States, which means that you should have been able to predict it. Other people have also read this affirmative. People like Ishan and Rex have read this affirmative. It also means that also 20 minutes doesn't mean that they're going to cut specific answers to this affirmative. They probably would have just put together more T-shells that I violate or read a state bad case, which they could have done anyways. Here's how the round breaks down. I've won the case. There are loads of defensive arguments on this shell that say they should be thinking about how to make arguments, and that there are generics they could have read, i.e. a state bad case or the NC in your Dropbox, which means you can vote on any of those arguments. Obviously, we both want to win. Real world means you vote nay. Good debate. Or